Stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting. Whether you're sharing business stories or personal stories, how you share them makes a difference in how you remember them and in how you're being perceived by the people around you. I've been doing this podcast for nearly 2 years, and it has compelled me to write a book about how to share your stories. It's right now available for pre-order until August 31st. This book will help you identify the stories that were pivot points in your life, those times that shaped your internal messages, the situations, conversations, and events that make you who you are today. I'd appreciate your support in this pre-order campaign, and I'm offering incredible bonuses that are very valuable to people who pre-order in quantity. Check out elkinsconsulting.com for more information. Today's podcast guest is Mark Bowden out of Toronto, and I am so excited to share this conversation with you, our listeners. Mark Bowden, thank you so much for agreeing to be on my podcast, Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. I appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, my pleasure. Great to speak with you, Sarah.
Well, I have to admit, I'm a little starstruck right now. I asked you to be on my podcast after I've probably watched your TEDx from 2013 at least a dozen times. So, and I've shared it through my workshops, and I tell people about it all the time. So if I seem a little nervous, that might be part of it.
There's no point in being nervous. You probably know the speech better than I do. You probably watched it more times than I have.
Well, that wouldn't surprise me at all, because as a performer, I've done storytelling performance and music performance, and I rarely listen to my own recordings. If I listened to my own recordings, I'd probably just stop doing it altogether.
Well, I'm glad you've enjoyed the speech so much.
Well, yes. And when we get into a little bit more detail, people will understand why this concept is so important to me. And we'll talk a little bit about what you do as an expert in body language and some of the books that you've written. And just so our listeners know, there will be links to your website and, of course, an embed of your TEDxToronto in 2013 will be on the blog post associated with this podcast. So if our listeners are ready to dig in a little deeper and learn a little bit more, there will be easy access to those things. So the first thing that I always do with my podcast guests is I ask you to share something about yourself that most people wouldn't know about you. Something wouldn't be on your resume or your bio or on your website in your About Me page. And the reason I ask this question is to give our listeners some context into who you are as a person before we start diving into personal stories. So what do you think? Do you have something you could share that most people wouldn't know about you?
Sure, absolutely. I have, for many years, since an early age, have been a Morris dancer. So that is traditional English or British male folk dancer. So not many people will know that at all. I don't know what helpful context that puts anything that I'm about to say into, but there it is.
Well, you never know. I mean, this may come back up in our conversations about personal stories that shaped us. So I'm excited to go on YouTube and look up Morris dancing so that I can get an idea of what this is. Are you still doing this?
I don't. I haven't done it for a number of years. Since I moved to Canada, I haven't danced simply because, it's not in Britain. Canada isn't Britain. And so it's not really traditional here. There are some teams that do it, but it's not on the original land. So it doesn't feel so right for me.
Oh, it feels a little inauthentic.
Well, I think the thing is, the dancing is very much tied to the land and to the culture, and Canadian culture is really quite a very different culture from British culture, for sure.
Right. I definitely understand that. And the reason I understand it is that there are some things like when I'm asked, I live in Helena, Montana, which is not a particularly diverse community. And over the 20 years I've lived here, I've been asked multiple times to speak about being Jewish and what that's like in a town with very little diversity and certainly not a sizable Jewish community. And sometimes they'll ask me to sing something in Hebrew, like a prayer or something, and it always feels a little weird because It's not in the context of doing something in my home where we would normally do it. So I totally get that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, often people, when they find out that I've been a Morris dancer, they'll go, oh, well, do some of the dancing now. It's like, well, why would I, why? Well, it's not. So, it is very much a cultural thing. It has lots of meaning to it, which isn't necessarily the meaning of pure entertainment for no reason.
Right. Exactly. Which is a totally different thing. If somebody just asked me to sing, I have no problem coming up with a song to sing.
Sure.
Well, so for our listeners' sake, the reason I asked Mark to be on this podcast is that his TEDx is called The Importance of Being Inauthentic. And the context of that, I love the word context because it's so meaningful. The context for this, the language that sounds kind of conflicting, being inauthentic and how important it is that basically if you don't step out of your comfort zone and do something that feels inauthentic, then your brilliant idea may never be heard. So the way that I say this during my workshops on stepping out of your comfort zone or personal brand is that if your authentic self feels most comfortable sitting on a couch with a glass of wine, and you have this brilliant idea that could have positive impact on the people around you, maybe even globally, that positive impact is never going to be felt because your authentic self is quiet and introverted. So if you're not sharing this brilliant idea with somebody who can help you make it come alive, then your authentic self is actually limiting the potential for your impact on the world. Does that kind of work? Is that where you were going with that, or is that just what I read into it?
No, I think you're spot on there. What I'm trying to get across in that speech, ultimately, I think, is one my trouble with the idea of authenticity, and that essentially there are multiple potential meanings around authenticity, and it's very difficult to decide on one universal meaning for that. I have some of my understandings of some of the meanings. Other people have their understandings. But ultimately, I found that authenticity was being used as a shaming or an excuse or a barrier. Yeah. So there was what I would call authenticity shaming, which was people going, oh, I don't think you're being authentic, which was really their way of saying, yeah, I just don't like what you're doing or what you're saying, but I'm going to shame you with the idea of being inauthentic or not authentic. It's a way of putting down something, because here's the problem. You have no idea whether somebody's being authentic or not. You have absolutely no idea. Only the individual can get close to the idea of whether they're being authentic or inauthentic. And even then, it's a little bit tricky. Okay. So number one, it was being used as a shaming. It was also being used, I felt, as a bit of an excuse. Well, I don't want to do that because it doesn't feel authentic to me. Well, I think you're just limiting yourself. I think you don't know what you're capable of. You're just trying to be comfortable. So I felt it was being used as a bit of an excuse as well. There were other problems with it as well, but those were my main problems with the idea. And what I felt is as a general thing around personality and us as people, as humans, is we are capable of so much more than we think. And so when we think about our own authenticity, often we're just limiting ourselves. And I didn't wish to live in a world where I'm limited by an idea of myself, that I should be able to push that idea and push myself into discomfort now and again, even if people would go, well, that's being a bit inauthentic. I don't care. I want to push my boundaries so I can find out what I'm truly capable of, which is more than I think I am. I think authenticity tends to be around what you think you are at the time, not what you might possibly be able to be. Does that make sense to you as well, Sarah?
Yes. And it's so refreshing to hear this. And I hadn't thought about the authenticity shaming, but I hadn't thought of that aspect. But it's absolutely right. I've heard people say, well, she's being inauthentic. And it always kind of niggled a little bit in the back of my head, like how would we know whether that's authentic for her? But at the same time, I found myself kind of getting into that slight bit of judgment of, this doesn't feel authentic to me, but how would I know? And I hadn't thought of that aspect of authenticity being an issue. I definitely was leaning into authenticity as a self-limiting word. And the way that I presented it in a podcast just a few weeks ago was, you need to ask yourself this question when you feel like you're wondering if something's inauthentic. Is it inauthentic? Is it truly beyond what you think is your core value? Or is it just out of your comfort zone?
Well, exactly. And I would even question even further core values, because we tend to set our core values under certain circumstances. And so again, we do not know what we're capable of.
Right. I think there's still a place, though, for authenticity internally. I don't think it's kind of like empathy. I don't think everyone has it. I don't think everyone has empathy, and I don't think it's something that everyone should be taught. Compassion, consideration for the people around you, absolutely. But empathy, not so much. And I feel the same way about authenticity in terms of only you can know what is authentic for you at any given time. And my friend Kimberly Davis wrote a book called Brave Leadership. And she says, your brave unfolds situation by situation. It's not suddenly you're brave and you can do anything. It's every time you are faced with something that you have to try to be brave, or you have to put that out there. I think it's the same thing with authenticity, that moment to moment you have to decide.
Yeah, I entirely agree. You can test continually your idea of whether you're being true to yourself, and you can test continually your idea of your values. Because again, around values, the moment you set your values and you go, well, I will always hold those values, I think that's pretty dangerous, because there's certain circumstances under which holding those values might well be very dangerous to yourself, to others, to the whole of humanity. So to the idea of like, oh, I'm going to stick to my values are set. I could probably put you in some circumstances where if you keep those values, you're going to harm a whole bunch of people, if not yourself and the people you love most. So you have to, the whole point is about being adaptable. It's about really thinking about yourself, thinking about your values continually, thinking about your authenticity continually, and not setting them in stone, not making them ideological, where you literally carve those values in stone and you go, that is me, I am set, I am done now, I have no more growth to do. Thank you very much. I'm a great person. I think that's very dangerous.
I totally agree. But then you do run into a little bit of a conflict when it comes to consistent behavior to demonstrate who you are. So, for instance, if I want to be known as a kind person, I have to demonstrate kindness every day in every action.
Yeah, sure. You got to test yourself every day to see, is that true? How true is it? Are you a kind person? Are you only kind to people it's easy for you to be kind to? Do you that you feel it's very authentic to be kind to? Are there people you don't really want to be kind to? And you could stretch yourself even more and purposely be inauthentic and be kind to people who it doesn't feel right to be kind to. That would be really stretching the value. That would be really testing the value.
Right. Right. Wow. I hadn't thought of it quite that way. Mark, I have to ask you, what happened years ago to make you start thinking about authenticity in this way? Was there a specific event or conversation you had with somebody that was like this kind of the beginning of your light bulb coming on about your work, particularly in body language and how people present themselves?
Yeah, I think there were elements of that. I've been involved in influence and persuasion and nonverbal communication and how to tell stories with pictures, and ultimately what many people would call propaganda, how to propagate ideas to a mass of people. I've been involved in that area a great deal. During all that exploration and work, I was mentored by somebody called Robert Anton Wilson, who is a philosopher and a writer, quite extraordinary man, passed away now. But an extraordinary person. In a number of his books, he would talk about the idea of fake. He was quite obsessed and got many of others of us very interested in the idea of fake, and that fake can be so good that it's the real thing. That, yeah. And that rather like, for me, the word manipulation has been turned into something bad, people have turned the idea of fake into something bad. This idea of you've either got it, you either own it, it's either yours or you can never have it. And even getting close to having it, that would be faking it. Well, that's just wrong. And that's wrong and quite dangerous. Because it means you're telling me that if I start to move towards being something better than me, by faking it first of all, by just performing the actions, I've done something almost immoral. I've done something almost immoral to try and be better, to try and better myself. And yes, it means for a while I might pass myself off as something else, but it's all in the progression to be greater than who I was, be something better for really good reasons. So it was the work of Robert Anton Wilson, and he did some great exploration around an Orson Welles film called F is for Fake. So watch Orson Welles' film F is for Fake, extraordinary film. Other works of art that carry on from that is something like Banks's film Exit Through the Gift Shop. There's a whole world of art which is actually around exploring the idea of how real and true fake is, and how authentic fake is.
So did you have a conversation with Robert that just kind of threw you into this kind of whirlwind or hamster brain kind of activity? Oh my gosh, this is what I meant to do.
Well, Anton Wilson's work is really about so Robert Anton Wilson, often known as just Raw, R-A-W. His work is about trying to open up, as a philosopher, open up your mind to more possibility. So one of the things he says is that, is the idea of something is the death of intelligence. That we as I say in many of my talks, that we judge things immediately. We go, oh, this person is,
right.
This person is that. Yeah, this person is bad. Well, no, it just feels like that. It feels. So when we're working with Robert, we would use E prime in our talk a lot, which is a word, a language that tries to get rid of the idea of is. So I might say, if I look at somebody and my instinct is, oh, they're bad. In E prime, I might say, for me, right now, I feel a bad feeling when I'm with this person.
Oh.
So what that suggests is that could change.
Right.
Because is bad is forever. Unless I
it's
go,
a black and white.
It's black and white.
Judgment.
It's the death of intelligence. Because intelligence gathers more information. Intelligence literally is the gathering of information.
It's the death of curiosity.
Absolutely, it's the death of curiosity, because we've got it all sorted. They're inauthentic. How do I know? Well, because I know, because I'm a really good judge of people. You see that word? I am a really good judge of people.
Well, the word judge always gets my hackles.
Okay. Here's the truth. Some, but not all of the time, I feel like I'm a really good judge of people.
Right.
That's the truth. Yeah. Anybody who tells me, oh, I'm a really good judge of people, you're a liar. You're just lying to me right now. It's just you don't know it. You don't know you're lying. Here's the truth. Some, but not all of the time, you feel like, or I guess you probably feel like, you're a good judge of people. Some, but not all of the time. That's more accurate.
And if you think that, you are going to find the evidence to support how you've judged somebody.
Well, of course you will. Of course you will, because that's the way the brain works. It's not out there to trip itself up. The use of this way of thinking that Robert Anton Wilson was trying to propagate, it's a harder way of thinking, because you come up with less absolutes. But that's the idea. You come up with more data to choose from, so you get to be more intelligent around it. And that's ultimately the work that I'm trying to do with audiences, is to help people be more intelligent.
So what was it that happened to you? So I'll give you an example. All of a sudden, this thought came into my head. When I started singing as a professional musician years ago with a small group where it was 2 guitars and 2 vocalists, and I did a few gigs where I was singing as the lead vocalist with a jazz group. But then I was invited to sing with a rock band, and I had never done that before, and it felt very inauthentic to me. And for about 6 months while I was singing with them, I was telling myself that I was in the wrong place, that this didn't feel right, that I couldn't pull it off. And one of our bandmates was kind of telling me that I was not really pulling off rock and roll, because I was trained as a jazz and madrigal and chamber music singer. So he was kind of giving me these clues that I wasn't really pulling off rock and roll. But he didn't mind, because I was wearing go-go boots and mini dresses. So it was, I was getting the audience going regardless. So, but I remember after about 6 months, I performed the song Tainted Love, the Gloria Jones version, not Soft Cell, just so we are clear about that. The original version by Gloria Jones. And I performed that song and wailed on it. I mean, just wailed on it. And when I finished, I turned around feeling so successful and so satisfied with my portrayal of that rock and roll song. I turned around and I looked at the bandmate who had been questioning whether I could do it. And his smile said everything. You did it. You totally pulled that off. And that was when I realized that difference between being inauthentic and stepping out of your comfort zone.
Right. So here's what I'm going to suggest you experienced. What you experienced there is that change is hard. And you mistook hard for inauthentic. You mistook the effort that your body has to go through and your mind has to go through to change patterns, to change. You mistook that for being inauthentic, because calling it inauthentic was an easy way out for you. You could have quit. You could have gone, I quit. Why do I quit the change? Because I'm going to call it inauthentic, which gives me a moral out, because being inauthentic is bad. And therefore, to carry on trying to
be something I'm not,
to develop myself into a rock and roll singer, as well as a jazz singer, as well as a chamber singer, to be bigger than the person I am, is going to be hard work. And I can get out on a moral basis by going, I can't be inauthentic. And here's what happened with that guitarist. I think that guitarist saw your pain. and felt the pain as well, because he or she was empathetic. They had empathy for you. They could feel the pain, and they were looking to help you get out by going, you're never going to do it, never going to do it. They were being kind. They were kind to themselves because they were feeling the pain and they couldn't deal with the pain.
Makes them uncomfortable.
Of watching you, but very uncomfortable. Yeah. So they were trying to help you get out. But here's what you did. You something inside of you, I guess, went, I want to be bigger. I want to be a bigger, more extraordinary me. And you kept on persevering. And suddenly one day, out you come. The transformation happens. The tadpole turns into a frog. The caterpillar turns into a butterfly. The metamorphosis happens.
Oh, I like that version. Much better. So what happened with you? What was your moment like that? You have to have had that experience personally, or you wouldn't be able to talk about it so well.
Well, here's what happens in general for me is that I spend a lot of time developing people through all kinds of ways. And so I see that change happen for them. Yes, that change has happened for me. I've had mentors and teachers and trainers who have not allowed me the comfort. So I sought out people who challenged me and wouldn't allow me to give up, or would push me through those transformations, which are hard work to go through.
Was there one situation in particular, one person that you remember a conversation like that with?
Well, there's a number, but there's a relatively famous teacher out there, a guy called Philippe Gaulier, who's one of the innovators of European theatre, who I trained with, visual theatre, so how to tell stories with pictures. And on the whole, he's well known as being a bully. He will purposely put you in situations where you have no idea what you're trying to do, the outcome that you're trying to get for him and the audience. And he will brutally hammer you, insult you, put you into very tricky physical and mental situations, so you transform, because you start to understand that the world can't, that the punishment that you think is out there in the world isn't out there. So he punishes you.
So what did he do to you?
I mean, he just tells you you're awful. Just tells you you're miserable. Just tells you you're useless. Up until a point where you transform and you just go, yeah, but it's okay. It's going to be, not what does it matter? You just go, yeah, but it's quite good to be me. It's pretty good. It's all I've got.
Is that the worst you could do?
Right. Yeah. What the worst is going to happen is it's going to be me. Yeah, it is going to be me. And here I am. This is me. This is all you get. If you like it, great. If you don't like it, nothing I can do about it, because this is it. So I think eventually what happens is you start to accept what you are. You accept the personality that you have, the limits, the abilities that you have right now, and you start to use those without criticizing them. It is quite a transformation in terms of your ability to perform, because you're no longer under the same system of prizes and punishment. You're no longer looking at yourself within the context of yourself and others and going, well, what's my prize for doing this right? What's my punishment for being right? What Gaulier is trying to do, I believe, is to get you used to ignoring the prizes and punishment in the world.
So that you can just bring everything you have internally to the situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jim Henson said it best when he said it through Kermit the Frog, which is what Kermit says to the rest of his Muppet friends, is take what you've got and fly with it. Which is, you got what you got. In fact, it was a lovely moment in Henson's funeral. where, that was, the central quote around Jim was that's what he said. That's what he told us all, is take what you've got and fly with it.
I love that. I don't know how I missed that, but it's perfect. It's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if you want to know everything you need to know about the world, watch the Muppet Show or watch the Muppet films.
That's so funny that you brought that up, because just this weekend, my friend and I were singing the Rainbow Connection.
Absolutely.
Because we were watching a rainbow in the sky, and we burst into song. It was hilarious. And I hadn't thought of it in many years, but we both agreed that was a perfect song, because it was childlike, but it wasn't infantile. It wasn't sophomoric. It was more this appreciation for the connections we make, and that relationships are really the key. It's not
absolutely.
about anything else.
Absolutely, very much relationships with yourself. And what Henson was often trying to do was get you connected with the child still inside you. Persona theory says there's still a child inside you. There's an adult you, there's a child you, there's the you that's gone through various traumas, there's the you that's had really great times. And when it gets difficult is when all of those yous are not connected to each other, and one gets hidden somewhere or suppressed somewhere or ignored. And when it gets really good or whole is when all of these things are accepted and connected. That's quite hard work, but I guess, that's the rainbow connection.
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground, Mark.
Well, that's what you get when you invite a Morris dancer on your show.
So I have to ask, the last time you performed as a Morris dancer, what was that about? Where were you? What was it like? I mean, what is this? I'm assuming that this is a fond memory and not a painful one.
No. It's never painful memories. Actually, the last time I performed, I believe, when it would have. Well, I'll give you two examples. One was in my parents' back garden, because we were having a party there back in England. Which was kind of a wedding reception party for myself and Tracy, my wife. But we'd been married in Canada, and we'd come back to England just to have a bit of a party in Mum and Dad's back garden
Nice.
for people in England who knew us. And so my Morris team showed up, and I danced there. And that's really, that's really important, because they show up to show the links with the traditional dance and the land and the culture of Britain, and especially England, and especially a specific part of England, the Cotswolds area, the Midlands of England. But then I think I danced later than that, in that I'd be in London sometimes, and you'd hear bells, because we wear bells, so the bells are to scare away, as we dance, to scare away evil spirits. So the tradition goes, because they don't like the noise, they don't like mirrors, so we'll often wear mirrors. So because they don't like to see, the evil spirits don't like to see themselves.
Me either.
I know we don't, and that's the point, is we don't like to look at ourselves. Mm-hmm. We don't like to look at ourselves, and
we don't like to see the evil part.
Yeah. So we'll wear mirrors, and we'll make a big noise to scare away the evil spirits as well. I was hearing a noise as I was walking through Westminster. I was hearing a noise that I record, and so I started moving towards it. And not only were Westminster Morris men dancing, but my team, Malton, were dancing there. And I was like, so it's like, you're showing up with all your brothers, your family. It's like they're there. And so I danced with them there. They kit me up, and I danced.
That's so cool. I love it when the timing works like that. I don't believe in coincidence. So
yeah. So one mentor of mine said, coincidence traced back far enough becomes inevitability.
I need to write that down.
Yeah, it's so I'm not a big believer in coincidence, but I do recognize that when you see something that you go, "God, that's a real coincidence." If you think about the patterns that have occurred, you kind of go, "Well, of course that was going to happen. Of course, that event would show up. Of course it would."
That's exactly how I think about things. And it's funny you bring that up, because when I first met my husband, 1995, so 20 something years ago, I said something to him about that. And I said, well, this is why this is connected, or this is why this happened. Because I tell a lot of small world stories. I love small world stories where you happen to run into somebody that you shouldn't have run into in a place that neither of you should have been. And I would tell these stories, and my husband would say, well, that's just weird, or that's just coincidence. And I would say, no, it's not coincidence. If I hadn't done this, then I wouldn't have been there at that time. Or if I hadn't met this person, then we wouldn't have had this conversation. And so this is why this happened. And after about 10 years of being together, he started thinking like that. He could start tracing back those connections. And more importantly, he started to see and understand why what we do and what we say matters so much. Because eventually there's going to be some kind of connection that we're going to trace this conversation back to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I would say there's a great beauty in inevitability and probability, as much beauty as in the idea of mystery. Because I think people often like to couch stuff in the beauty of mystery, because, isn't it a mystery that I was thinking of somebody and they phoned me up? Isn't that a mystery? I think that's quite beautiful. That's quite a beautiful idea to put it in. But I think it's just as beautiful an idea to put it in under the category of, well, isn't that inevitable? Or isn't that just probable? Given how connected we are, isn't it probable that would happen? And isn't that a wonderful thing that it was probable rather than mysterious? That I'd be thinking of my friend and my friend would call. Is it more beautiful that that's a mystery, or more beautiful than well, isn't that just probable given how much we think about each other?
I like that. It just, it takes me right back to the beginning of our conversation when we were talking about how much potential we have, that we so underestimate ourselves. And when I talk about these connections, I talk about how powerful your subconscious brain is, and that where our conscious mind might be surprised by this person calling us out of the blue, our subconscious mind knew it all along, because it was picking up cues that our conscious brain just simply couldn't have processed in the moment with all the information that we are barraged with at every moment. So when you said that, it just reminded me of that first part of our conversation about our capacity for growth and change, and that we underestimate that so dramatically.
Yeah, I'm glad you pick up on that, because it really is an important thing that we understand how we often limit ourselves, how much further we can go, how much our subconscious or unconscious is playing out some of the instructions that others have given it, that we've given it. And I just think if people can be a little more in charge of the instruction code that's going into that, that could be helpful for all of us. I know that there are some external factors for many, many people, which we really don't have any control of. There's some suppressive external factors, some very old and suppressive external factors that cause limitations. But outside of that, if you can strive a little more to be in charge of the instructions that run that unconscious and conscious mind, then you may find that you're even more powerful than you thought, even under those limiting structures around you.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, the limiting structures, because I went straight to the whole purpose of my coaching that I do, the storytelling coaching that I do, and the book that I'm writing, which is that those structures that were created that you had no control over as a child can actually be adjusted. And what I'm talking about specifically is those internal messages that limit us, that we gave ourselves, or in some cases were given to us as children or young adults. So if somebody that we admired and respected and loved, or a caregiver, told us that we weren't very bright when we were a child, that is that kind of internal message, that instruction structure that you're talking about, that then limits us for as long as we don't look back at that story and understand the context around what happened. So for instance, why did this person say this to you? Was it because you didn't do well on a test, but they weren't paying attention to all the other evidence? So let's say you didn't do well on your math test in 5th grade, and your uncle says, well, you're just not that bright, even though your English score is in 100%, or you're really good at reading people and you're a great friend to people. So you have great observation skills and compassion and empathy and all that stuff. But all they're looking at is that you didn't do well on this test. And so this is a cognitive distortion that I've been hearing a lot about, that generalization. So maybe those structures can be adjusted, but as you say now, it has to start with that choice to open it, to think about it, and to understand where it came from, so that then you can be more open to the possibilities.
Yeah, so I would totally agree with that. Yeah.
So now I'm curious about yours. Like, where would you go with that?
Yeah, so I would say on a personal level, for us all, we can look at those stories and investigate them and go, who was that? Who gave us that story? When? Why? Could we get another story from somebody else that might contradict that, or should we just ignore the story? I mean, there's lots of ways to deal with that generalization, that one point of data that we've now created as a generalization. I think there are other systemic or systematic stories that some of us get told, which we're hearing that story from many, many people. So, you hear that in stories of, well, that group of people, they always do X. Or they're not, so now, but then you've got
other kind of generalization.
Right. So generalizations that groups can hear, but from whole societies or institutions or countries. So once these stories are institutionalized and we rely on these institutions, then it becomes a lot harder to fight the story, because the story is embedded in everything. And so
policy,
for example. Yeah. So that's tougher. So that's tougher. And we've got to make sure, I often find when people are talking about how to break the bonds of story, that they'll mistake a personal story, an institutional story, for a personal one. And they'll go, well, you just need to reframe that story. It's like, no, you can't reframe that story because it's in a policy. It's in every time I go into the educational system, it's there. Every time I go for a job, it's there. Yes, I know it's a story, but it's institutionalized now. And so some, but not all of it, or much, but not all of it, is not under my power. And so I think, yes, absolutely. We need to take the power to change the stories we can. And we need to take the power to ask other people to change the stories that we can't.
Right. I hadn't thought about that at all. That is a completely different perspective, and a little painful.
Yeah. Well, everybody will have experienced some of that. Some people experience it a lot of the time. And so, we all of us can be victims of that to some greater or lesser extent. All of us have some power at some point, often, to change some of those institutional stories. Whatever institutions we may have some kind of influence and persuasion around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think about that a lot when I talk about personal brand and being a good ambassador for your people.
Right.
And I think about that a lot when we traveled to Europe. I spoke about that with our sons. The first time we were in Italy, they were 8 and almost 11. And we just kept saying, here's the language for please and thank you. We landed in France and went to Italy for a couple weeks. So we made sure that the words that they knew in those languages were please and thank you.
Yeah, great idea.
It was really important to us that people saw these American kids as good representatives of our people, good ambassadors. And so that is where we have some level of control to adjust mindset and stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We can help influence and persuade others to see us differently, and we can help influence and persuade ourselves to see others differently as well.
Right. Wow. Full circle, really. This has been such a great conversation. I think I could go on for a lot longer chatting with you about this.
I'd be happy to do that another time. So if people have enjoyed this conversation and they think there's more to be had from it, let's get together again and talk some more about all of this. It's interesting stuff. Certainly, we've gone in depth here in a way that most of the podcasts that I do don't head for, which is great. This is a great, unique interview. So thanks for that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And yes, we will definitely have a follow-up, potentially after my book is released, so that we can talk about the context of what we talked about within the book, because I still keep coming back to the relationship between your stories and stepping out of your comfort zone, and that whole idea of being inauthentic in order to grow and change. I just find that to be something that we could dive much more deeply into.
Yeah, well, it's great that you're writing a book, and we're talking about authenticity, because of course the idea of authentic comes from author, of writing it yourself, authoring it. And so only you are in charge of your authenticity. Nobody else can ever tell you anything about that. You are the author of your life. Some of us get better paper than others, and some of us get more ink than others. And, there's all kinds of ways we're born and countries and positions we're born into. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, you're the writer.
Huh. I had not put that together. I'm feeling a little silly now.
Well, look, I've really thought about this word. So.
Well, it is your life's work, and you're really good at it. So I really appreciate it. Mark, thank you so much. Again, for our listeners, you will be able to connect with Mark through his website and learn more about what he does. I encourage you to watch his TEDx. When my husband sent it to me so many years ago, he said, "You're going to love to hate this guy." And honestly, I didn't really understand after I watched it. I had to watch it twice for me to understand why he said that in the introduction. And so I would encourage our listeners to watch this, the power or the importance of being inauthentic. Mark, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a great interview, and I'd be happy to do it any time again.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Your Stories Don't Define You, but How You Tell Them Will. Are you ready to explore your own stories to find your patterns and pivot points? You can do that with my new book, which is now available for pre-order. Your story isn't a timeline of experiences. Your story is each individual incident, conversation, an event that made an impact on how you think and how you see the world around you. This book will help you identify those incidents, helping you create a story portfolio to refer to as you choose which personal stories to tell and how to tell them. And when you can look back at that portfolio and find the patterns in your life, you can address many of the internal messages and communication challenges that are limiting your success at work and in your relationships. Visit my pre-order site on publishizer.com. Click on Proposals and search for Sarah Elkins or Your Stories Don't Define You. Please visit my website for more podcast episodes, blog posts, and information about how I can help you develop and share your stories at elkinsconsulting.com.
Listen to me, honey, while I say, how could you tell me that you're going away?